There we are. Sorry about that, folks. I thought doing it from the office this evening, having our Park District interconnectivity here, would make for a smoother transition to our start time. But as usual, I had a little trouble. Nice to see you though, and I hope you're staying dry this evening. Sounds like we got a little rain hitting the window here. But it's springtime, and that's what's to be expected. I've got all kinds of cool things to share, so I think rather than me just blathering on blindly, we'll get started with tonight's slideshow about all of our recent findings out there in the good nature. Hang on just a minute, I'll get the screen share going. There we go, from the beginning. All right, so if you had a chance to read last week's column, and even if you didn't, we're going to talk first off tonight about skunk cabbage. It's our area's earliest blooming wildflower, and it's, for better for worse, it is one of our area's most distinctive wildflowers. I showed this photo to my mom last week, and I said, "Mom, this is so great. The flowers are starting to bloom again." And I showed her this picture, and she crinkled up her nose, and she said, "That's not a flower." It is. It really. The skunk cabbage is. It's distinctive for the way that it lives in local wetlands. It has a preference actually for, at least in this area, for fens, which are wetlands that have an alkaline water source. The seeps and the springs in this area are coming up, surrounded by our bedrock, which gives it an alkaline character. And it grows in places where some other wildflowers might not be quite so comfortable. This particular photo was taken at Hickory Knolls, and this one was at Fearson Creek Fen. Those are two local areas here in St. Charles where you can find skunk cabbage. I don't know if you'd call it a bed of skunk cabbage, or just the growth of skunk cabbage is much wider, broader spaced at Fearson than it is out at Hickory Knolls. But both places are pretty lovely. Someone sent me some photos from a park to the north up in Elgin. It's called Trout Park. It's also, you can find it locally down at Red Oak Nature Center, the trails to the north part of that property, as well as on the grounds of Lipple Park, which adjoins Red Oak. So actually Glenwood Park too, which is also in that same area in Batavia. That area, there's a lot of calcareous seeps, fen-like conditions around there. So when we look at this flower, again, if you're like my mom, you can say, "Oh, that's not a flower." It's a little unusual in that as it grows, its stem, it does have a stem, but the stem is pulled underneath the ground by the roots. So really all we see are the flowering structure, which consists of what we call a spathe and a spadix. You may be familiar with those terms. If not, you might hear them again as we get a little bit farther on in spring, because it's the same terms we use when we talk about the jack in the pulpit flower that also grows in our woodlands. The spathe is the outer structure. In this case, in the skunk cabbage, it looks kind of like a hood that's surrounding the spadix, or the inner structure that has the flowering parts on it. In the jack in the pulpit, the pulpit part is the spathe, and the jack part inside is the spadix. The spadix is where the pollen, the male structures that produce the pollen, and the female structures which contain the ovaries which produce the seeds, those are all inside of these these structures here. You can kind of see it peeking out. It almost looks like a tropical fruit that's peeking out in there. That climate that occurs inside this spathe of this skunk cabbage is pretty cool. I got to tell you, not only does this not look a whole lot like a flower, it doesn't smell like a flower. It doesn't smell sweet like a flower anyway, because it blooms so early. In fact, this is a flower that can actually produce heat. It can metabolize starches in the roots. It can cause chemical reactions, and that will melt through the snow should we have a springtime snow. And sometimes you'll even see these flowers appearing in a ring with a ring of snow still around them. They create this warmth, and that. One, it helps the flower emerge from underneath the snow, and two, it helps the scent of this flower waft through the air. So I was standing at Fearsome Creek Fen the other day, and I'm looking at the flower, and I'm thinking, wow, what is that? Oh, I know what that smell is. It smells doesn't smell like a skunk. It's oh gosh, how would I describe it? It almost has like a burnt rubber character to it, at least to my nose. It's not a terribly pleasant smell, but that's okay, because it's not because it blooms when it does. It's not trying to attract the insects we associate with sweet smells, like say butterflies. We don't have many butterflies that have emerged yet. We've got a couple that hibernate here, but really the pollinators that this flower is going after are the things that seek out stinky things, flies and beetles. They will be drawn to that aroma. They'll go in, they'll crawl around, they'll transfer, they'll pick up some pollen. They might then fly to another flower, drop some of that pollen off, and that's how the skunk cabbage progresses through to its next stage. Another kind of cool side benefit of this little warmth microclimate that occurs inside of that spathe. It can be sometimes 70 degrees on, say, a freezing cold day, literally a 32-degree day. It can be as warm as 70 degrees or higher if it's in the sun inside of these flowers. So the pollinators, the flies and the beetles, they're flying in. Things that eat those will also be drawn to these little hoods, these spathes. We might have spiders that are hanging out inside there looking for a meal. They might do some incidental pollination while they crawl around. They might be seeking some warmth, but they then might also be getting themselves a meal. Here's some skunk cabbage. This is a great example of how your eye sometimes needs to get trained from year to year. I find this true too when I go out looking for mushrooms, like say morel mushrooms in the springtime. You might be standing in an area thinking, oh gosh, where are they? Are they late? Are they not here this year? And then you kind of refocus, you see one, and then you start to see them everywhere. That was the case at Fearsome the other day. I've grown accustomed over the years to going to the westernmost overlook at Fearsome Creek Fen. It's the one that's closest to Route 31 for you local folks. But over time, the skunk cabbage has spread. It's not just at that overlook. It's at the second wooden overlook, and it's also north of those overlooks across what we call the Ice House Road, the old gravel trail where they used to pull ice out of the river for storage in the house across the street. There's skunk cabbage all over that's popping up, and a lot of it has yet to flower. So if you're in the area, if you want to go check it out, Fearsome Creek Fen is a great place to check it out. You can find it, as I said, down at Red Oak and Lippold and Glenwood Park. It's a little soggy to get to those areas. Nice thing about Fearsome is you've got the gravel trail there to follow and keep your feet dry. Now, if you don't have a chance to get out over the next few weeks, you can As we get into May, you might see skunk cabbage at its next stage, which is when the leaves get much larger. They get to be about the size of, say, burdock or even rhubarb leaves. They're quite large. They're this bright greenish color, and that's generally in my years of looking at skunk cabbage. That's usually when I've stopped looking at it. And this year, though, I have a new goal. I want to share it with you, and maybe you'll want to take it on as well. I want to try and find skunk cabbage fruit. So this is what occurs when that spadix inside, after it's pollinated. Remember, a flower's job, its whole purpose for being, is to form fruit and seeds so that the plant can move around or spread out, or at least continue. Well, that structure inside of the spathe, it enlarges, it forms little sections. Inside each one of these little sections is a seed. Sometimes they get dispersed by game birds. A lot of times, though, they're just sort of left to open and fall, and that's why we see skunk cabbage occurring in the large beds that we do. So this usually occurs in our area in, say, August or more likely September. So I'm going to mark my calendar. Maybe you'll mark yours. We can go out and go on a skunky fruit hunt as we get through summer and into fall. All right, with that, let's stay with wetlands for one more slide. This is an email I got, gosh, over a month ago, and I felt a little bad that I wasn't able to get back to this person right away. But she was asking about whether muskrats live in Brayburn Marsh, and that's the photo she sent. Brayburn is, again, local folks, you might be familiar with it. It's there at Fabian and Randall Road, and they have, there's a wide variety of wetland creatures that will live in Brayburn Marsh. The part that this person is referring to is actually the part that is west of Randall Road, behind all the storefronts, behind the Walmart, behind the Portillos. That area actually serves as a drainage for where a lot of the stormwater water runs, as those parking lots there are drained. Several years ago, I think it was 2017, I walked back there with some friends, and there was definitely beaver activity at that time. This person was wondering whether what she was seeing, was it muskrats? Was it beavers? What I heard, and I'm pretty sure is the case, is that the beavers that were active there were removed. Beavers in public areas of drainage aren't generally welcomed by our local municipalities. When water has to move and beavers stop it from moving, that can cause problems like flooding, and these large retail corridors like Randall Road, they can't have water backing up in the parking lots and things like that. So the beavers are gone, but the muskrats remain. Now, this was a photo taken from a window looking out on what looks to me like a muskrat hut. This is another shot. This is actually another wetland area. But I wanted you to see what a muskrat activity looks like. In the foreground here, we have a low mound. I'm not sure if this is an old hut. I kind of think this might be what's called a feeding platform, where muskrats will pull vegetation up and feed on them. They are primarily herbivorous, although, as we've talked about in the past, they have a taste for certain meaty things, especially freshwater mussels. In the background here, though, you can see a larger hut showing I think this is a fairly active little muskrat community. I saw lots of signs of early feeding. There was some scat on some rocks in this area. Muskrats are still fairly common around here. We see them. If you don't see, if you think you're seeing muskrats but you're not seeing huts, that is entirely possible because, like beavers, they will also dig into shorelines or banks and make their homes up in the ground as opposed to constructing a lodge like this in the water. They want to make sure, though, that they always have an entrance that is underneath the water, which will prevent predators from gaining access. Mink live in a lot of our local wetlands too, and they certainly would love to dine on some muskrats if they could get to them without too much trouble. Mink will swim to get to their prey, but a lot of times they find they don't have to do that. So muskrats do keep themselves somewhat safe by having that underwater entrance. The other thing I wanted to mention about muskrats, and I didn't put a picture up because all the ones I have are just kind of yucky in a nature nerdy kind of way. They are pictures of roadkill muskrats. This is the time of year when last year's young are being, should we say, ousted by their parents. They are allowed to stay. Last year's young are allowed to stay with mom and dad through the winter time, but now that this year's young are being born, it's time for last year's muskrats to be off on their own. Sometimes they get lucky, they disperse, they don't get run over by cars, but a lot of them do. If you're seeing roadkill as you're driving past wet areas and you're seeing things in the road or by the side of the road, and it's not your your usual squirrel. Of course, everybody knows how to identify a roadkill skunk. If it looks dark, if it's got a long naked tail with it, you're seeing one of those unlucky young muskrats. Now, one thing, especially near town here, and actually probably over at Brayburn Marsh too, there's some storm drain outlets over there. Muskrats are one of several animals that use storm drains as conduits to move around. It's a great way to stay out of sight, to stay off the roads, and to head to new territories. So that does help save a few muskrat lives. But anyway, it is muskrat season for many levels. These huts or lodges, we're going to start seeing more of them as the young muskrats move into new territories. They'll be chewing down cattails and piling those up with mud to make their own houses. And then also seeing signs of those ones that were not quite so fortunate crossing the roads. So anyway, just a little thing. It is muskrat season for a couple different reasons. With that, let's move on to another topic. This was something we were talking about this past weekend. We did, for the first time, Hickory Knolls held a maple sugaring program called Maple Magic. If you can think back to last weekend, Saturday was pretty cold and wet. Sunday was actually beautiful. Over both of those days, we were tapping into some maple trees at what we call the U of I property at Peck Road and Route 38 near Hickory Knolls. Looking up in the trees, well, there's a family of Cooper's hawks that live there. Last year's nest is still there. I think maybe mom and dad are getting ready to set up housekeeping again soon. We got scolded a few times while we were there. There was also a hornet's nest. However, it wasn't this one. It was this one. This is a great time of year to be looking at last year's hornet's nests, if you can find one. Now, a lot of people, when the leaves come off the trees in the fall, they kind of freak out. They see this big nest up in the tree and they think, oh my gosh, I've got to get rid of this. These are not the sort of nests that get reused by bald-faced hornets, which aren't even hornets, they're wasps. But it was the common name is sort of a misnomer. But they chew up bits of wood they scrape off of fence posts and bare wood where they can find it from dead trees. They chew it up and they make paper. They make those large football-shaped nests, and then they make these the nests inside, layer upon layer. There's row upon row of these chambers where the queen will lay her eggs, and when the larvae are fed by the bald-faced hornets, the workers, and then when it's time for the larvae to pupate, they will spin a little silk cover over those chambers. They will transform. They'll mature into an adult. Takes, I don't know, about a week or two, I think, to pupate. Anyway, when they're ready to come out, they chew their way through that silk covering and they emerge. Well, when the colder weather starts to come, as we get into November and December, the queens that will be emerging now pretty soon in springtime, they leave this hive. And they go overwinter in leaf litter and log piles, places like that. And then everybody who's left is not going to make it. Last year's queen, all the workers, the larvae that were not far enough along to pupate, or pupae that were not far enough along to emerge. There's lots of hornets that don't make it inside the nest, which means there's lots of free protein to be had. So these nests, if you see them at this time of year, they're torn open. They're eaten fed upon by a lot of different types of animals. If a squirrel can get to the nest, they will. Sometimes these nests are too far out on a branch. It's too risky for the squirrel to get out there without possibly breaking or falling off of the unstable nest. But if they're firmly anchored on some branches further in on the tree, squirrels will feed. So will birds. Here's a chickadee. Our friend Valerie took this picture a few years ago of a chickadee helping itself to some free food. Woodpeckers are known to feed on these nests. Blue jays, lots of different animals take advantage. So if you've got a bald-faced hornet you've got a nest in your yard, or if you see your neighbor have one, if you see them heading out with a can of Raid, because they think they've got to, make sure these things don't come back. Try to deter them from doing that, because it is a great source of food for a lot of our neighborhood wildlife. Okay, with that, it was awfully warm yesterday. It was over 70 degrees, which means time to do some crayfishing. Last year in August, the first Saturday in August, we partnered with Red Oak and the Forest Preserve of Kane County, and we participated in the Rusty Rodeo, where we harvested rusty crayfish from the streams. This year, some of you I know attended last year. We had over 100 people come out to Fearston Creek Park to help catch the invasive rusty crayfish. It was great. We caught close to a couple thousand rusty crayfish. These guys are pretty hard on our native crayfish, so it was good to get them out of there, but it was a little hard. It was a little impactful on the stream. And we want to try and minimize it. While we're trying to do a good thing, we don't want to do a bad thing by accident. So I went out the other day with Emily, our new program supervisor, and we went hunting new sites for this coming year's Rusty Rodeo. So we went to Mount St. Mary's, and I got in the water where the canoe launch is there at the north end of the park, and then we walked southward. We walked for quite a distance. I would say maybe, 100 feet or so. We didn't really see any activity, but then I saw this guy here, and if you look on the carapace, if you look right above my thumb, you'll see a rusty red mark on the carapace. This was a rusty crayfish. Once we saw one, we started seeing a few more. And then we found this crayfish. Pay attention to those bugs flying around too. We're going to talk about them in a few slides. Well, this is a male crayfish. We'll get to that in a minute too. But this one didn't have a rusty spot. Now, I have to admit, I've gotten kind of lazy. There's lots of different things you really should look at to do your crayfish identification. There's this the area between the eyes that kind of pokes out over where the crayfish mouth is. That's called the rostrum. Each different species of crayfish has a different rostrum shape and sort of a texture or sculpture to the rostrum. There's different spines and things like that on the claws. I need to do a little bit more research on what constitutes a rusty crayfish, but I'm pretty sure this was not one, which was kind of exciting. As I mentioned here, it was a male. You can hear the song sparrow singing in the background. How do we know it's a male? Let me show you. We're gonna flip him over here. And so we're seeing crayfish are decapods. That means they have 10 legs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then the two up front with the cheilipeds or the pinchers. Now, when we look at the abdomen, which is what you'd think of as like the tail, although the tail is actually what's underneath my thumb there. The abdomen underneath is lined with what we call swimmerets. And in females, that's where she will put a sort of a mucilaginous sticky substance, and she'll glue her eggs there. And then the young crayfish will actually ride around on mom's abdomen as well, clinging onto her and those swimmerets. Now with the male, if we zoom in here and we look right here, they look like enlarged swimmerets. Those are actually his reproductive organs. So when you turn a crayfish over, it's usually pretty easy. If he's in reproductive mode, they do have a non-reproductive mode, but when he's ready to be to mate, you're going to find those reproductive structures underneath. So we found a male of a non-rusty species. I kind of think this is a virile crayfish. It used to be called the northern crayfish. I'm going to do a little more digging on that, but it's exciting because last year when we did the Rusty Rodeo, we didn't find anything other than rusty crayfish in Fearson Creek. As we prepare for this year's Rusty Rodeo, it will again be the first Saturday in August. Pretty sure we'll be holding it at Mount St. Mary's this year. But I'll bring you more details on that as that date gets closer. It was a great way to spend some time out in the water. Now, I said, notice those little bugs. Again, if you're local, you have probably noticed that we've had some things that have been hatching. It's a normal part of river town life. The different insects that spend their larval or nymphal or naiad stages in the water eventually have to emerge and become adults and fly and lay some eggs and start the process over again. Well, what we've been seeing, and I believe we've had two different emergences. There was one when I took these pictures, and then there was one yesterday that was quite large as well. These are not mosquitoes, even though they look like them. They they kind of taste like them. I didn't actually taste it, but I did inhale it, and it did stick in my throat, just the way clouds of mosquitoes will too. These are what we call midges, or chironomids. They are non-biting midges. There are other midges that do bite. We'll probably be seeing some of those too as we go through the spring seasons. But I wanted to give you an up close look. These two were on the side of our Park District van. On the left, we have the male, which you can tell by his brushy antenna, feather-like antennae. He uses those to sense the pheromones of the female, and she's pictured there on the right. Now, when you see these clouds of these insects, they're usually what we're seeing is a mating cloud. They're mostly males, and they come together and they use those antennae to try and sense where the females might be. Females tend to hang out on prominent points. Sometimes it's a branch, sometimes it's a rock, sometimes it's you. So if you find you've got a lot of male midges swarming around you, chances are you might have a female midge that's landed, on your head or your shoulder or something, and they're just sensing her and they want to get close. The flip side, so I mentioned these things, they live in the water for, up to a year before they actually emerge. These guys, when they're in the water, they're known as bloodworms. Now, bloodworms, they can live, they don't have a very high requirement for dissolved oxygen. They're fairly tolerant of pollution, so they can live in some not so great areas. Now, just because we're seeing them doesn't mean that our Fox River is in not so great shape. They can also live in cleaner areas as well. I think, though, if over time, if we start to see less and less of our other aquatic insects, like our caddisflies and our mayflies, and we start to see more and more of our midges, that might serve as a signal that our water quality is not as good as it used to be. We'll keep an eye on it. I know our custodian next door at the Baker building, he was talking about these things. He's saying, oh, yeah, did you see all the mosquitoes? So we've been doing a little education over there, too. They're not mosquitoes, they're midges. And we might see some more emergences too. They are a little bit of a, some people call them annoying. I know our custodian was, he was having to sweep up a lot of them, but they are a tremendous food source for a lot of our returning birds. Coincidentally, night before last? No, it was the warm day that we had last week. There was a bat that was exiting the Baker building at the same time as the midges were flying around. So these are a great food source for birds, and they're also a great food source for bats. And they're not mosquitoes. This was something that was kind of cool, and also sort of exciting to see as we're talking about water quality. There's some rocks, but if you look really closely, there is a freshwater mussel. I kind of bumped it a little bit so it closed, but it was a living, I believe it's a plain pocketbook. It was in between two rocks, and then just a little bit downstream, there was another freshwater mussel. Now, the catch of the day yesterday was crayfish, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to explore to see how many more mussels were living there in that stretch of the water. But you can bet I'll be going back to check it out and maybe get some more footage. You just never know what you're going to find when you get out and you start poking around. So speaking of crayfish, yesterday was an exciting day here at Good Natured World headquarters. We had a visit from Renee, who was one of the early members of the naturalist department here at the Park District. And we were talking about lots of our favorite things, including snakes. Now it's a little bit early maybe to be looking for these. I know that several people have seen garter snakes so far, so it probably won't be too much longer before these snakes are out. But this was actually a photo she took last summer of a natural area in DuPage County. Pretty sure this is a Graham's crayfish snake. Now, in this area, we have two different types of crayfish snakes that they get that name because that's what they specialize in feeding in is freshly molted crayfish. So crayfish, not having bones, they have an exoskeleton. In order to grow, they need to shed that skin. And just like an insect, when they molt or cast their skin, they have a soft body for several hours until that exoskeleton hardens up again. That's when these crayfish snakes like to move in and have a feast. Well, Renee had found this snake, and she said, I'm not sure if it's a Graham's crayfish snake or if it is a queen snake. Well, I looked at it, and Graham's crayfish snakes, they look very similar to queen snakes, as we'll see in just a minute. But if we look at the bottom side of the snake, snakes' scales grow in rows, and you can count those rows. And you can see, if you look closely, you can see they go up on a diagonal. The rows are they go from the lower left up to the upper right. You can count scale rows 1. I don't know if you can see my, let me see if I can make it so you can see my, oh, here we go. Let me use the laser pointer here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. Well, the important part there is that Graham's crayfish snakes have a light yellow band on scale rows 1, 2, and 3. So I think this was a Graham's crayfish snake, which is pretty rare. And again, this was far western DuPage County, so really close to our stomping grounds here in St. Charles. Meanwhile, here in St. Charles, we have, this is most definitely a queen snake. They are both Graham's crayfish snakes and queen snakes are in the same genus, Regina, which means queen. But the queen snakes, they have some dark stripes on their belly. They have 4 stripes actually, and you can see that here. And you can also see how the light stripe on the side does not go through the scale rows. It goes 1, 2, and then it goes to dark after that. So the light stripe on the side is much lower on our queens. This, by the way, was found in an area where we happen to see a lot of rusty crayfish too. So hopefully these queen snakes, and here you can see this is a nice shot that shows the dark stripes underneath. There's another one showing how the dark stripes on the belly go up the sides, and there's just not a lot of light coloring on the sides of our queens. Oops. So anyway, some good news there. It sounds like we have Graham's crayfish snakes in the area as well as queen snakes. Maybe between the two of them, they can get a handle on those rusties. All right, with that, you kind of saw a little sneak peek of what the next slide was. This is what happens, or at least this is what happens at my house when I leave groceries in the garage. I had done some shopping and carried in all the perishables. I carried in, made 2 trips with what I could, and I thought, whatever's left, you know what, I'll get it in the morning. So it actually ended up being 2 mornings later that I went down to get the rest of the groceries from the garage. And when I emptied the sack, look at what I found. So I looked at it and I thought, oh gosh, it's a grass spider. I have grass spiders, and we all have grass spiders. They are pretty common throughout our area. In fact, you might remember a very famous grass spider, dining room spider. I had brought one in, not this past winter, but the winter before. They are known to make a broad, flat web with a funnel at one end. You'll see them as we go through the summer. Those webs get larger and larger. They're not particularly sticky, but they're made to kind of trip up an insect that's walking along, and then the spider will emerge from the funnel at one end and come out and pounce and have herself a meal. Well, grass spiders, they have two prominent projections from their abdomen. Their spinnerets back here are very obvious, and they're quite well put to use because of the large webs that these spiders are known to spin. If we compare this grass spider to grocery bag spider, we see there's an absence of spinnerets on the back. So my initial assumption was wrong. I didn't have a grass spider in my groceries. I had a wolfie. Now, I don't know what kind of, like, Closidae is a pretty large family. I have a feeling there's a cosmopolitan wolf spider that occurs around the world. I believe it's European in origin, but I don't know exactly which wolfie this is. I did take grocery bag spider back down to the garage, and I let her go. But I was struck. Initially you might think, as I did, with the broad markings on the up here on the top, on the what we call the cephalothorax, which is kind of a combination of a head and thorax. It's got that light marking, but then you can see the markings on the abdomen are different. There's an absence of spinnerets here on the wolf, because wolf spiders are not, they don't spin a web to catch their prey. They are ambush predators, so they can make silk. They're spiders. They all have that capability, but they don't need those spinnerets for making a large web. They'll just maybe spin some lines so they can find their way back to their lair. They might, females will use silk to create their egg cases, but anyway, there's not a prominent spinneret. So I had a wolfie in my grocery bag. I was also, though, struck as I put these pictures together for you tonight. I was struck by how much larger and beefier looking the legs of the wolf spider is as compared to the more, I don't want to call them spindly, but more slender legs on the grass spider. A wolf spider's going to have to do a lot more running, traveling over ground to go hunting, and so it's sort of built for the job that it has to do. And I guess I never really thought about it that much until I saw these two pictures side by side. So now that I thought about it, you can think about it too. Wolf spiders versus grass spiders. The wolfies, they do live multiple years. Those of you who remember dining room spider, I tried to get her to last an entire year, and she made it until about the end of February, but she did expire after she laid her eggs. Wolf spiders, however, they can go 2, 3, 4 years and get quite large. I'm going to keep an eye out in the garage, see how many other wolfies I can find down there. Anyway, keep your eyes open. Things are starting to wake up. This is just a quick little thing to wrap things up this evening. I always am on the lookout for signs of spring and things that are easy to share with people. I noticed this, and this is something I remember the very first outdoor ed class I took at Northern Illinois University in, 1999 or 2000, whenever it was I made that career change. I remember a person in the class pointing out a bright yellow tree that was across a field and said, that's a willow, isn't it? Aren't willows the ones that turn yellow? Well, sure enough, yes, they are. So you might not be able to identify the species like this, but when you're driving along, I think was this out on Kesslinger, I believe. So I was doing probably 45 miles an hour, so you can identify willows just by, at this time of year, those bright yellow branches. You can do it here, you can do it here, and here, and here, and here, and you can do it here, and here, and here, and here. even if you're not a plant person, which I most certainly am not, look for the yellow branches. You'll know you're looking at willows. All right. With that, I'm going to stop the screen share. It looks like we've got some chats, and I've also got some other things I've collected. In fact, there's an exclusive offer for good-natured viewers. First of all, here, let's check out the chats. Um, Laura, are you talking about skunk cabbage? Found a few down at Leroy Oaks, down below the nature center in the wet area by the creek.
Yeah, that was the skunk cabbage. I was lucky enough to run into Josh out there, and he was coming out. And
Oh, I know where you are. When you walk along the creek and you go down the hill, kind of, and it's real muddy,
Yeah, when
that
you go
area.
to where that bridge is, and
Yeah,
you go to take a right inside there, it's kind of swampy and muddy all down
yeah.
there. Yeah, and he said, you want to catch a few or take a look at a few skunk cabbage?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So yeah, there weren't a lot, although I had seen in years past, farther down where it gets really muddy at the other bend by the bluffs.
Yes.
The leaves I had seen a lot of, so I know there's more out there, but it
Okay.
was a little mucky.
Yeah. Well, and that's where well, Fearsome Creek was one of the first places I ever saw skunk cabbage. But and so I always think of, and whenever I think of skunk cabbage, I think of Fearsome Creek Fen. But it is possible to see it there and not get your feet muddy because of the gravel road that they put in when they were hauling the ice out of the river way back in the day. But yeah, it's I'm super excited. I actually listed on my calendar on September 1st, start looking for skunk cabbage fruits because I've never seen that part, and I want to see what the fruit looks like. I want to see what it smells like, and I also want to see what the seeds look like. So
Yeah, that sounds like a new mission.
well, put it on the list. Add it
All right, we'll add it.
to the ever-growing list.
Yep,
It's a date.
yep.
Well, Carol, I see you. What I think we talked about that. It's the things that pollinate skunk cabbage are the things that like stinky stuff. So
Yeah, you did mention it was like insects like beetles and stuff. They
beetles and flies, yeah. Although I did also hear that early emerging, like even honeybees, which overwinter when they get a warm, there might still be snow on the ground, but they'll send scouts out looking for early sources of pollen. So there have been cases of honeybees, probably not drawn by the smell, but drawn by that by the pollen that's being offered inside of that spade, inside the warm, welcoming hood. That
yeah.
might be a little smelly.
That's one of my favorite spring flowers. I love
Yeah.
it. It's so fascinating to me.
Well, yeah, just the way it's cool enough that it's able to, attract pollinators, but the fact that it can actually heat itself up, I mean,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
plants can do that? I'm
Yeah.
going to tell my mom that. We'll get her to like skunk cabbage
Good.
one way or another, right?
Good.
Um, yeah, Michelle, yeah, that was, there are still, so last year's Rusty Rodeo, like I said, we caught almost 2,000. And I think down at Glenwood Park, the folks from Red Oak and Creek Bend caught almost as many. Those are still being there. We froze them in big blocks and we feed them to the Blandings turtles at Hickory Knolls, and they just love them. So we'll be going at it again. The last step that remains is to make sure there's no major functions being held at Mount St. Mary's that first Saturday in August. If there's a bunch of weddings and stuff, we might not be welcome there. Maybe we will. Depends, I guess, on who's getting married and what they like. But the nice thing about Mount St. Mary's is that we can really spread out, and I think that there'll be a little less impact on the stream bed if we. And it's also a lot rockier there too. And there's many access points at Fearsome Creek Park. We just had that one place that we could get into the river or into the creek that wasn't too dangerous and it wasn't covered in poison ivy. But Mount St. Mary's has a nice long shoreline. How are midges different from gnats? Well, You know, there's lots, and there's not just, you know, dozens. There's hundreds of different types of midges and gnats and flies and mosquitoes. They're all actually, they all are dipterans, which means they have two wings instead of four. Um, there's different species. Generally, I think of a gnat as having a shorter and more rounded body, whereas our midges and our mosquitoes have a more elongated body. There's biting forms of both and non-biting forms of both. That's that's how I think of them as being different. There, last was it? Gosh, no, it wasn't last year. I think it was at least 2 years ago. There was an emergence of what was called a buffalo gnat, and I think again it's a common name. So sometimes the common names there's some overlap. I believe the buffalo gnat was actually a type of biting midge. So it could be just who's using the term too, how it's kept separate. So yes, yeah, we did feed the rusties to the critters. Sarah saw some bright yellow branches today at the arb, and they were witch hazels, not willows. Well, all right. So if it's a big old tree that you can see when you're driving 50 miles an hour, it's a willow. If it's more shrub-like, actually, Sarah, I heard that the witch hazels are blooming. I'm going to make a note of that for next week. We haven't done a spring witch hazel before. We've talked about fall witch hazel, but thanks for mentioning that. So I'll write it down after we're done. Are the flowers of wild ginger also pollinated by flies? I believe so. So I don't know what a wild ginger flower. I don't think it has a stinky smell, but it is very nondescript, and it's maroon, and it's underneath the leaf. So I think it might attract. Generally, our maroon flowers tend to attract the non-traditional pollinators like flies or beetles. Pawpaws are another example of a maroon flower that isn't so attractive to, say, bees and butterflies as it is or flies and beetles. Okay, you know, I mentioned, so last week, if you tuned in last week, you know that tech support puppy ate my visual aid. I found some more. Luckily, these things are not difficult to find. This is a Chinese manted egg case. If you're out and about, generally the rule is, if it's attached, leave it attached. This is one thing that I encourage you to break the rules on, and there's no laws. You're not going to get in trouble for collecting these. These are non-native creatures. The Chinese mantis the females get to be, about up to 8 inches in length. They've been known to eat vertebrates. I know up in Lake County where they're doing smooth green snake reintroductions, they've actually had records of Chinese mantids eating the neonate green snakes. There's that famous picture, and I don't think it's just one picture. I think it's happened a few times where female Chinese mantids have been eating, they've caught hummingbirds as they've been hanging on hummingbird feeders. So these things are all over the place right now, and they're pretty easy to see because the new vegetation hasn't started to green up yet. So they look a little bit like a toasted marshmallow on a stick. Not too many other things look like it. I don't know, my camera on the laptop isn't quite as good as the other one, but you can see there's layers. They also remind me of that, I think it's called Great Stuff. It's that spray foam, that expanding insulating foam you can buy. Remember I said there's a free offer for good-natured viewers. Jill, a member of our restoration crew, collected all of these and pulled them out of our natural areas to get the numbers down a little bit. These are free for the taking. Anybody who would like one, let me know. I'll see if I can get 1 or 2 or 3 to you. There's no guarantee that they're going to hatch. I should also go on to say that praying mantises do make cool pets, and again, as a non-native species, there's no law that's going to get you in trouble for raising one. We did an experiment a few years ago where we collected probably at least this many, and I would say maybe not even a quarter of them ended up hatching. So there's no guarantee that you would end up with a pet praying mantis. What our general protocol is, though, when we do have one that hatches, is we let the 200 or so babies that emerge kind of duke it out. Some don't really, they're not real healthy when they come out. They don't make it. There's a lot of sibling rivalry that occurs. They feed on each other. We usually end up with 2 or 3 that we then feed. We start off with flightless fruit flies, which, yeah, that's a thing. You can go and buy them in the pet stores. And then we graduate from there and find larger and larger insect prey for them. They'll eat up to mealworms, and what the mealworms turn into, those flower beetles, or not flower beetles, but the mealworm beetles, and even crickets as they get bigger and bigger. So lots and lots of fun with these, and I've got lots and lots of them. So if you'd like one, let me know. The other thing I wanted to show you, see, we got some more questions there. When I was out looking for praying mantis egg cases, I found a lot of goldenrod galls, and I just wanted to show you briefly. Let's see. There are some that are round, and there are some that are oval. The oval ones are actually a goldenrod gall moth, and the round ones are a goldenrod gall fly. This time of year, you might find some that have large holes in them. This doesn't mean that the fly has emerged. This means that a bird tried to peck on them. But there's tons of these around right now. They're really cool, and you might encounter them while you're looking for these. Okay, a couple more questions. Our witch hazel flowers are pretty mature and floppier limbs. So we're past already. Is that, Anne? Is that was that your spring? Do you have spring witch hazel? Oh, we got a question too from Carol. Do marsh marigolds also emerge when there's skunk cabbage? Marsh marigolds, Carol, they're a little bit later. I generally associate them with April, but the same sort of habitat, that fenny, seepy, calcareous seep sort of location. Hickory Knolls has a really nice display of marsh marigolds on the shelf very near where the skunk cabbage is growing. But they're just a little bit later on. And they've got that bright yellow that'll attract some of our more traditional pollinators. What should you do with the mantid egg cases? We've been burning them. They're really not welcome in the area. They are. There's some concern that they're displacing our spiders. They fulfill the same niche in that they are large arthropod predators, and I know there's a couple of land managers in the area who thought that they've been seeing in the areas where they have high concentrations of Chinese mantids that they have fewer of our gyapes, or the black and yellow, the garden spiders, or some people call those banana spiders. years ago, there was a local college. There were two professors that were going to do a study of how praying mantis presence affects spiders, but I don't know if anything has been published on that yet. I don't know where that research is at. But to your question, Laura, we don't have the native mantis in Illinois is the Carolina mantis, and it doesn't, so far anyway, it doesn't come quite this far north. So if you find praying mantis egg cases here, it's either going to be the Chinese, or we also have, in lesser amounts, the European mantis, which is instead of being like a toasted marshmallow shape, the European mantis egg case, it actually looks a little more similar to our Carolina mantis cases that you'll see farther downstate. It's more oblong. I keep holding my pinky up thinking you'll somehow know what's going on in my brain. They're about, say, I don't know, what is that, an inch and a half or so long, and they're more oblong in shape. They're the same puffy character, but oblong, and they almost look like they've got a seam down the middle. I used to have some European egg cases. I think I left them at Hickory Knolls, though. Let's see. Okay, so Anne, you have vernal witch hazel. Witch hazel's at the arbor in perfect condition today. So maybe it's time we do a segment on vernal as opposed to the autumn or fall witch hazel. So I think we'll leave that as a topic for another time. Did we hit all the chats? I think so. All right. Well, does anybody else have anything they would care to share with the group? If not, we'll be talking about, let's see, what's on the docket for next week. It's funny, people say, oh, I read your column. I can't remember. As soon as I turn the thing in, it's off of my, I'm on to the next thing. Let's just say we're going to have lots of cool nature when we meet again next week, including a little talk about the witch hazels we have. We might even throw in hazelnuts too, because I know there's a little bit of confusion about witch hazel, hazelnut, and we do have some spring blooming forms of both of those. So anyway, folks, really appreciate your time tonight. Great to see y'all. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a great week. Stay dry. Happy spring. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pam. Bye. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.